President Trump's decision this week to withdraw from the Iran nuclear agreement was welcomed here in Israel, of course, by the Netanyahu government as a needed corrective to what they saw as a fatally flawed agreement. And it was hailed in other parts of the Middle East, such as Saudi Arabia, as a blow against Iran.
But elsewhere, such as the European nations who co-signed the deal with Russia and China, it was Trump's decision and not the agreement itself that was seen as fatally flawed. And the move also had plenty of critics in the US, including Leon Panetta, a former defense secretary and CIA chief in the Obama administration, who spoke with our Michelle McCory.
Tearing up that agreement or having the United States now withdraw raises really serious questions about where do we go, because by doing that, he has obviously impacted on our trust and whether or not the United States can be trusted with any agreement. Secondly, it's impacted on our allies. And in order to accomplish anything, we need to have the support of our allies, like Great Britain and France and Germany and others, and China and Russia were part of that agreement as well. And thirdly, the problem that I see is that Iran now has every incentive to basically go ahead and implement enrichment with the potential of developing some kind of nuclear weapon in the future. And that creates a very dangerous situation, because the issue then becomes, how do we stop them from doing that?
Well, for more on those consequences of President Trump's withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal, let's go to Washington and speak with Jarrett Blanc. He's the Senior Fellow of Geoeconomics and Strategy Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And Jarrett, let's pick up on something that Leon Panetta just said in an interview with us, the impact this will have on our relationship, with the U.S. relationship, with its European allies, relations that were already tense over other issues, such as trade.
Well, of course, he's exactly correct. I think that the United States and the Trump administration have gotten a well-deserved reputation for disregarding the concerns and national security interests of our allies and behaving in a haphazard, arbitrary, and non-strategic manner. So it's not surprising that you would see Chancellor Merkel, for example, saying it's time for Europe to take its security in its own hands. So, this is a problem of the Trump administration, but sadly it's one that's going to last past this administration.
And how is this likely to affect stability here in the Middle East?
Well, I think it's going to have negative effects across the board. I think that it increases the possibility of escalating confrontation between Israel and Iran over the Syrian border and elsewhere. And also, you saw earlier this week the Saudis announcing that if Iran makes progress toward a nuclear program, that they'll do the same. The White House couldn't muster a policy statement that they would oppose Saudi development of a nuclear weapon despite Saudi participation in the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So I think what you're about to see is serious, serious problems for the region, for the transatlantic relationship, and for the world.
Well, Jarrett, since you bring up Saudi Arabia, let me for a minute play advocate for those who agree with President Trump's decision, who say that if you look at countries like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the Gulf states, they felt that the Obama administration signing this deal was a betrayal of their interests in favor of Iran. What about the argument that this is that President Trump's decision is being held not just in Israel, but in Riyadh, in the Gulf, in Cairo?
So I think we all share an interest in Iran not having an unconstrained nuclear program or an uninspected nuclear program. That was the achievement of the JCPOA. And so reducing that achievement and putting ourselves in a position where either the Europeans are going to negotiate a way for the deal to survive, but they'll have to give up leverage on Iran on any other issue and leave the United States isolated, or they're going to fail to negotiate such an agreement and Iran is going to resume industrial scale enrichment. That is just not in anybody's interest.
And Jarrett, would you say that this puts the US in a stronger or a weaker position? And does Donald Trump pulling out of the deal weaken the US's credibility here?
So both it weakens our credibility because it we've proven ourselves to be unable to take yes for an answer. And there's just no question that we're in a weaker position. So first of all, we are not going to have the same kind of economic leverage we had over Iran before the JCPOA. Before that deal, we had a global coalition, not only our closest allies and partners, but also China, Russia, India, aligned with us in order to put pressure on Iran. We are not going to rebuild that because now we're seen as the problem, not Iran. So we've got less leverage than we did before. We are either going to be isolated from our European allies and unable to confront Iran with them, or Iran is going to restart unconstrained enrichment. And again, either of those outcomes is bad for the United States. The one outcome that is absolutely not possible is the one that Donald Trump promised, which is that somehow from this position of less leverage and less trust, we are going to get a quote-unquote better deal.
Jarrett, I want to look at how this could impact on the nuclear talks with North Korea that we now know are going to start on June 12th with Kim Jong-un. There are those who agree with what you say. President Trump's decision weakens the credibility of the United States. It didn't stand by, if not a treaty, certainly an agreement it would made. But there are others who say it shows that President Trump himself is a man of his word. He said this was a bad deal. He was going to nix it. He can be trusted to keep his word, and he's a strong leader, and that could impress someone like Kim Jong-un. So break down those two responses for us.
You know, to be honest, I'm unimpressed with the arguments that this is going to have a huge effect one way or another on Kim's thinking. I think the North Koreans have long since priced in zero trust of the United States, so I don't think that's going to change here. I am concerned that it's going to have serious effects on Russian and Chinese thinking. We will need Russian and Chinese support both to get to any deal with North Korea and to implement any deal with North Korea. And I'm worried that they're going to look at this, remember how much effort they put in to help us get to the JCPOA, and wonder if it's worth the time.
And Jarrett, what sort of strategy now can we expect to see going forward?
I think, bluntly put, there is not a strategy going forward. President Trump teared up this deal, as far as I can tell, animated by animus toward his predecessor. We do not now have an Iran strategy. And if you could take a look actually on the State Department website and see a background briefing by two senior officials immediately after the president's speech, and look at all of the I don't knows, we haven't planned that, we don't have a plan B. There just isn't a strategy here. And so that's, as much as I disagree with the policy, as much as I disagree with the decision, as a professional, I find it amazing that President Trump has not given his government enough instruction to actually build up a strategy to try to support his decisions.
Jarrett, I just want to ask you, President Trump has brought into his administration hardliners like John Bolton, elevated someone like Mike Pompeo, who have advocated direct, perhaps even military confrontation with Iran. Do you see that as a possibility?
I think there's a lot of I have a lot of disagreement with President Trump. I certainly share what I believe to be his gut instinct that we should not be getting engaged in wars of choice in the Middle East or anywhere else. I do worry, though, that people like Ambassador Bolton and maybe even Secretary Pompeo might try to maneuver him into a situation where that becomes, if not inevitable, then at least more likely, by trying to provoke crises where without off-ramps, without solutions. And I think pulling out of the JCPOA, I think imposing impossible demands on North Korea, as Ambassador Bolton has done over the course of the week, I am very, very worried that an inexperienced president without strong policy instincts might find himself in a position where none of us would like to be.